So hi everyone, this is Nikhil and welcome to part 2 of the videos in week 1. In the last video we have seen the basic sketching aspect of Fusion 360 and we have seen the first 3 steps of the design model sequence. In this part we will see the 4th step in more detail, and as we go along we will also touch on some of the practical design considerations for designing thin plastic parts such as the battery cover of a toy car. So we have seen the first 3 steps in the last video and we have designed this particular rectangle in XY plane. So now we'll see how we can convert a 2D sketch into a 3D model. But before we begin, we should know what are some of the basic approach and what are the basic commands. So if you go to this particular create menu on your top corner, then you will see some options like this. And you can see extrude, revolve, sweep, loft, rib, web, and so many options are there like hole, thread, box, cylinder, and so on. So if you don't know about a command, you can simply hover over your mouse and it will show you a snippet which explains how the command works. So for example, if I hover over my mouse onto this extrude command, it shows me that if there is any sketch which is drawn in 2D and this is going to convert or extrude that particular sketch in the third dimension and by adding the thickness, and it is going to give us a 3D object. Similarly, if you hover over your mouse below, which is known as revolve, it revolves the particular sketch around a particular axis to produce circular objects. And the third option is sweep, which means if you draw a particular sketch and if you draw another sketch which is of a particular shape, then the first sketch will be swept along the second sketch. So that is nothing but your sweep. So these three options are most widely used when it comes to designing 3D parts, and all the other options are used as per the requirement. So it is not absolutely necessary for you to learn each and every command of Fusion 360, but as you go along, you will be understanding how each command is going to work and in what kind of scenarios we will be using these commands. So generally, students face a lot of problem when it comes to understanding how these tools work. So let me first take you into Paint and let me explain how actually the 3D modeling happens. So this was our XY plane and we drew a rectangle like this one. So now we'll see what is meant by extrude. Extrude means it adds material in a direction which is perpendicular to the plane of the sketch. So as this is an XY plane, it is going to add the material in Z axis. For your reference, I will draw the axis system so that you will understand it in a better way. So this is your Z axis, this is your X axis, and let this be your Y axis. So if you are drawing your sketch on XY plane and if you extrude that sketch, it is going to add material in Z direction. And if you draw a sketch on XZ plane and if you extrude it, it is going to add material in Y direction. And similarly, if you draw a sketch on YZ plane and if you extrude that sketch, it is going to add material in X direction. So you have understood how we will use extrude command. So extrude command is not only used for adding material but also removing material. We will see that one by one slowly. And now we have understood the basic approach of what is meant by extrude command. Let me also explain you another thing, that is, if you want to develop a 3D model, there are multiple ways in approaching and multiple ways in which you can develop the same model. Let's say for example, there is a plate like this in 3 dimensions and it has a certain length of L, it has a certain width of W, and it has a certain height of height H. Then there are 3 basic ways in which you can develop this particular model. One is you can draw a rectangle on YZ plane and extrude that in X direction. You can draw this rectangle of dimensions L and W and extrude that in Z direction, and you can also draw a sketch in the XZ plane and extrude that in Y direction. So here our dimensions will be length, width, and extrusion dimension will be your height h. And in this case, the rectangle size will be length by height and the extrusion length will be width. And if you are using this third approach, the height will be h, width will be w, and the extrusion length will be your length of the object. So based on the requirement and based on the scenario or the situation, you will be using three different kinds of approaches for developing the same part. So now we will see what is meant by revolve. Revolve is a command which revolves the particular sketch and develops cylindrical or circular objects. So let's say you want to develop a cylinder. There are two ways in which you can develop a cylinder. One is draw a circle on the XY plane. So this is your x-axis and this is your y-axis. So you can draw a circle on the XY plane and extrude it in the Z direction so that you will get a cylindrical object like this. That is one approach. And another approach is you draw a rectangle either in XZ plane or YZ plane. So this one will be your Z axis. And if you revolve this particular rectangle 360 degrees, then you will be able to develop a cylinder. Similarly, you can draw a rectangle on YZ plane and this one will be your Z axis, and you can revolve this particular rectangle again in 360 degrees to develop this cylinder. So now what you have understood is, even though the object is simple, there are more than one way in which you can achieve the geometry. So this is something which you need to understand, because depending on the complexity, depending on the situation, depending on the problem statement, and depending on the scenario, you will be using various commands to develop the same object. So as you go along and as you become more experienced in using the CAD softwares, you will know which command will suit which application. So now we will go to the third command, which is known as sweep. The third command is sweep. So let me again draw the axis system like this. Vertical direction you have Z axis, and on the horizontal plane you have X and Y axis. So let me draw a curve like this on the XY plane, and at the end of this particular sketch I can draw a profile like this, and if I sweep this particular profile along this particular path, then I will be able to get a pipe kind of a structure. So as per these terms, you will call this as profile. The circular object which you have drawn is known as profile, and the curved thing which you have drawn is called path. So in certain scenarios you will be using this particular approach known as sweep. So there is not only a limitation in which you can use only in this particular way, but if you want to cut a particular groove such as your cooling paths or such as your inlet manifolds and exhaust manifolds, then you will be using this sweep command. And now that we have seen all the basic commands for creating 3D model, we will see how we can use all these commands for removing the material. So I will go back to the first command again and let me show you what is meant by removing the material. So like I said, let this be the z-axis, let this be x-axis, and let this be y-axis. And let's say you have already created a particular 3D object, let's say a particular cube or a particular cuboid. So this is your cuboid, and if I want to create a hole inside this object, what will I do? That is known as removing the material. So the command is same, which is known as extrude or revolve, but you will be using that for removing. So what you will do is you will select this particular plane here. You will select this particular plane, and what you will do is you will draw a circle. And after you draw a circle on this particular face, if you extrude it downwards, the Fusion 360 will automatically create a hole for you. So that is the smartness of Fusion 360. Based on what you are trying to do, it automatically detects the kind of a command which you are trying to develop, and it will automatically create a hole for you. And if you want a hole in this particular direction, you should have certain imagination that you should draw circle in this particular face. So now if I draw a circle in this particular face and if I extrude it in this particular direction, then I will be able to develop a hole. Similarly, if I select this particular face and if I try to draw a square like this, then I will be able to create a square hole. The hole need not be always circular, it can be square also, or it can be any other shape. So in that way, you will be able to develop 3D objects using Fusion 360. Not just Fusion 360, any 3D CAD software if you use, this is the kind of approach which you will be using for developing models. So before we dive into Fusion 360, first we will try to develop this particular object. So like I said, we wanted to develop this particular battery cover. So if you zoom in closely, you can see there is a particular plate, and for this particular plate, two different projectors are being placed, and at the end you have this particular U-shaped object. So this U-shaped object enables the person to remove the battery cover, and these two projections in the end enables the battery cover to be secured and in a safe way so that the batteries does not come out. So now we'll try to develop a particular mind map in which we can develop this object. So we have three things. Firstly, we have a rectangle, and it is having a certain thickness. So that is our point 1. And secondly, we have small projections like this. This is one projection and this is another projection. And we also have something like a U-shaped object. So we have something like this. So let us try to develop this particular object using mind maps. So firstly what we can do is we can draw a rectangle like this and we can extrude it vertically. That will be step 1. Secondly, what we can do is we can create a plane on this top surface, and on this top surface we can develop these objects. we can draw two different rectangles like this. And then if we extrude it upwards, then we will be able to create these two projections. So the second feature is also developed. And thirdly, this is a U-shaped structure. So for that, what we can do is we can create a plane in vertical fashion passing through the center of the object, and this is going to be our plane. On this particular plane, we need to draw something like a U-shaped object. So this is going to be the path of the profile. So after this is done, we should do a rectangle here. If you draw a rectangle and use the sweep command, you will be able to develop this particular feature like this. So that is how you will develop the models using Fusion 360. So now you have understood the basic approach. Let us dive into Fusion 360.